Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us here at Servicely as we talk through our AI agents for service management. On the call today, I'll let Sam do his own introduction, but we have 30 minutes that we will be stepping through, broken in two parts essentially. What we'll have is I'll do a bit of an overview touching on Agentic AI, what it is, how is it relevant, what does it mean for us in the service management space, and then Sam will actually dive into some more of the details, and then at the end of the session actually show us how we can use these Agentic agents to actually help us in our day-to-day life. Apologies for the croakiness. I've just got a call from the US, and my excuse to them was we're Southern Hemisphere, so we're in the flu season. So a little bit croaky, but nonetheless, we will make our way through the session today. So kicking things off, there we go. So just a safe harbor, standard safe harbor. I won't read it to everyone. You feel free to. It's really standard for software industry. Of anything that we're presenting here is certainly not intended for any commercial value or otherwise. Quick introduction. So Dion Williams, one of the co-founders here at Servicely. I've been in the market, service management market specifically for 25 plus years. Sam asked me, Dion, I need something interesting. I couldn't think of anything interesting, so I thought, well, I'll just make something that generally people would consider interesting, is that during compulsory military service back in South Africa, I actually delivered multiple babies as part of my military service. So a bit of a unique experience, but certainly something interesting nonetheless. Sam, maybe just a quick intro from your side before we get into the slides.
Thanks, Leon. Hi, team. It's a pleasure to be here. Sam Herring is my name. If you haven't met me, I'm one of our senior solution consultants here at Servicely. I have delivered exactly 0 babies and intend on keeping it that way, but I am really excited to be here to show you, some of the emerging capability within the platform. I've done my sacrifices to the demo gods. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Dion.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so I get technology to work for me. There we go. So just very quickly about Servicely, who are we, why do we exist, and then we can get into the details for today. So fundamentally, the core of Servicely is we're AI-powered workflow platform. We're founded in Australia, however, we are global, both through direct offices as well as partners. We're founded by industry veterans who've been in this space for many, many years, many successful service management implementations from both small and very large, complex global projects, and really saw an opportunity in the market in the mid-enterprise space for a cost-effective, right-sized, enterprise-wide AI workflow tool. And that's fundamentally what was the genesis of the Servicely technology. Now, obviously, the world never stands still. And whilst we were founded with this notion of AI at the core of everything we do, clearly AI has become a lot more topical in recent years. And as you would therefore expect, Servicely is really at the forefront of what these AI technologies are able to deliver. And in particular for today's session is really looking at Agentic AI specifically. It's quite interesting, just the rate of change. Not too long ago, we were talking about generative AI was all the rage, and everybody was talking about LLMs, large language models, and how cool it was. Write me an email that does X, Y, Z, and we all thought that was great. And then suddenly Agentic AI has come onto the agenda. I think what we'll see today is that there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that AI will be a core part of everything we do in the future and will continue to evolve at a fairly staggering rate. So just from a global presence, we run out of AWS. We have AWS data centers across the globe, as well as partners and team across the globe. So really able to support our global customer network. If we have a look at the agenda today, we'll do a bit of an overview around Agentic AI or AI agents. What are they? How can they help me expedite service delivery in specific context to the team that we have on the call with us today? Then we'll get into the far more interesting stuff, which will be Sam kind of talking around, exactly getting started. What does it look like? What are some things we can do? And then more interesting, looking at using AI assistance for assistance. So kind of where is the world going to as far as a futures? So very quickly, what is Agentic AI? there's a lot of hype around it, and a lot of people are asking what it is. Well, fundamentally, if we look at agentic AI, it's this notion that we can now start to have AI starting to become, to a certain extent, autonomous. We can have these agents that are able to start to do work for us. These agents can learn from their experiences. And really, when we look at agentic, we have this framework, and Sam will touch on what this framework looks like. It's, as often is the case with these technologies, there's a single kind of word, if you like, but when you really kind of unpack it, you find that there's a number of components and different things mean different things to different people. And whenever you're in a situation where there's a new evolving technology, it takes a bit of time before the terminology and the understanding settles. So Sam will really help us baseline when we look at an agentic AI system, what does this actually mean? But fundamentally, it's this notion of our ability to use AI agents to start to do work for us. More importantly is, what do these agents mean for us in service management? When we set out to develop the Servicely platform back in 2015, is we really took a view and said that we felt AI was very well suited to the service management domain. And the reason being is there's lots and lots of repetitive things that happen in the service management space. The most simplistic end of the spectrum would be things like password resets. Most service desks are dealing with that on a regular basis and one of their higher volume type calls. And in the early days, it was all about, could we use virtual agents, aka chatbots, to help facilitate that process? So in the very early stages, AI was always well suited to service management. Fast forward to today, how can we start using these AI agents in service management? And it gets very interesting again, because AI agents are very well suited to our service management world. Being able to do things like the ability for an agent to start to monitor an environment like our service desk and identify underlying issues and potentially automatically raise problem records or major incident records. Previous to generative AI and the capabilities that we had, is we would have a far more static way of doing it. Is we would look at looking at the short description of the ticket, and we would then be trying to make a decision on, is there similar tickets in the system that could indicate some underlying issue? The challenge you'd have back in the day is you were really looking for keywords. And as we know, the nuance of human language is that the way in which we describe things may say different words but mean the same thing. Bringing in generative AI, that allows us to now suddenly start to look at things and have a level of intelligence to say, hey, these things appear to be very similar. Maybe there is an underlying cause. So what that allows us to do is start to move far more into a proactive model, where instead of waiting for an incident to be logged, we can also have an agentic system identify these emerging patterns as suggested, be that for major incident, be that for problem identification, but really moving into a proactive state of how we operate. The big difference is we start to see it being more dynamic. So historically, through rules-based engines and workflows, we could go and write a bunch of rules that would check for certain things. If this, then do that. The challenge that you'd have is, as soon as the scenario changed or anything changed, all the rules became invalidated and suddenly the logic no longer worked. What Agentic brings to the table is this ability to learn from the environment and, very importantly, understand context. Context is everything. And what AI today brings to us is this ability to understand context. If anybody has done anything on ChatGPT or any of the LLMs, we tend to start off a prompt with, act like a whatever the role is that you want them to be. And that's done intentionally because you want the AI to understand the context of what I'm going to give you in the context to who you are and therefore how you should deal with it. So these AI systems now bring context for us and then really adjust its actions based on real-time input, handling complex scenarios that static solutions simply could not, because they were very rules-based. If this, then that, change any of that logic and suddenly the rule no longer works. And importantly, we now start to see agentic AI, break down complex objectives into smaller subtasks where we can have a combination of agents and tools to collect data, make decisions out of that data, and move forward. It goes without saying, if you're kind of following where we're heading towards, there's no doubt that the next big thing is going to be governance. If we're now starting to have agentic AI being able to do a level of autonomy and automation, as humans, we always want to have safeguards around that. We do not want the AI to just go off and do stuff. So making sure that there's safeguards built in and guardrails into these AI systems that we can leverage to better serve what we're going to be doing with them. So if we have a look at what the AI agents in summary enable us to do, is one, they can perceive the broader environment. They can draw context from that. They can use that context and that information they're able to gather to make decisions and to determine the best course of action. They can perform tasks, so they can actually start to execute these tasks. And importantly, as we're starting to move forward now in these agentic frameworks, is the ability to have what we call memory, and the ability to actually understand and learn from previous interactions of the AI agents in getting better with everything they do. So now we have these self-learning systems, and that's certainly where we see things are moving to in the future. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Sam. Sam will give us a bit more of a deep dive into what does this framework look like, what are the components, what are the responsibilities of each of those components within the framework, and then at the end of that, Sam will actually show us some examples of how agentic AI could be working and helping us in our day jobs when we're looking at it from a service delivery perspective. So Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Dion. Hi, team. So our agentic stack, we've talked a bit about, why it's beneficial. Let's switch gears. Let's get a little bit technical, nothing too scary, I promise. We'll talk about how we're bringing agentic AI directly into the Servicely instances that you already have today. All right, so the framework is actually quite simple, and it aligns really well with what some of the really big players in the market are doing by having a staggered, layered approach to prompting that allows us to drive the best possible outcome on a per persona basis. So as all good things do, the very first step of our agentic stack is our interface. How do we actually communicate with these agentic AIs, these agents, right? And one of those interfaces is through Sophie. Right, Sophie, as most of you will know, is our system of intelligence, our conversational exchange. In the examples we're going to talk through today, you're going to see a very GPT-like approach. But of course, all things in Servicely, there are many different ways that we can execute these agentic frameworks. We'll offer some examples as we talk along. Sophie allows our team to have a conversational interface with an AI assistant. Right? AI assistants are our middle managers, our orchestrators who work with individual agents with their own prerogatives and their own goals to do the actual work, to review the information, to perform activities, to be autonomous within our service management landscape. Those agents do so by consuming AI tools. Those tools within the Servicely context are things like creating records, reviewing data, executing automation and orchestration, but they can also include third-party activities through API calls or data lookups, whatever the case might be. Bringing all of this together allows us to have a really fluid approach that is extensible and personalized to you and your business, while still offering that full autonomous agent stack. Right? So what's an example of that, right? That's a great question. So let's assume, for example, one of our users comes along and asks Sophie a question about, incident workload, right? They're a queue manager within IT. They're curious to understand a little bit more about, what does our workload look like right now? Instead of going and digging through lists, trying to generate a report, trying to find an existing dashboard, they can talk to Sophie. Sophie will use our natural language understanding to identify the right assistant to help with this particular query. And that assistant will have access to all of these different agents, right? An incident manager agent whose whole job is to review incidents within the platform and give us some insights into, what's open, what's the big priority, what are we spending our time on today? Maybe a reporting analyst agent whose job is to look at the historical data and understand that context. And a queue manager agent itself, right? Who can look at the prioritization and where things are going and how they're moving within the stack. By breaking those key roles into their own discrete agents, we can reuse them for other purposes, which is a really nice side effect. But the most important part is that these agents have their own prerogatives, their own goals, their own expectations. So when the incident manager, as an example, invokes one of these actions, right, in order to do its job, it's going to have a slightly different intent to the reporting analyst or the queue manager, who could action the same tools but yield different outcomes with different opinions and different inflections. They all roll back up to the assistant, whose job is to normalize all of those different multi-prompt, multi-shot queries and bring it back to that conversational interface directly to the end user. Right? So all of these tools on the right-hand side of the screen, things like knowledge searching, external integration, document review, sentiment analysis, they allow all of the agents to glean their own insights about what's happening within our service management landscape and bring it all back directly up to that end user. So how does it work, right? How's it work in practice? Let's have a little look. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a moment, but what I want to show is some example assistants that we've been working on behind the scenes. And then the last part of the demo, the bit that we do sacrifices to the demo gods for, is I want to show you how we can use our agentic framework to self-perpetuate the agentic framework. Right? Because our AI agents not only help you interpolate and action information within your service management landscape, they can also execute actions within the platform. So we can use agents to build new agents. And because it's a framework that's extensible, like with most things within our platform, you're able to bring your own ideas to the table and really get creative with how we start solving some of the key niche problems within your organization through this framework. So I'll stop sharing for a second. We'll kill the slides. Let's do the fun bit. Bear with me a moment while I switch gears and share the right window. So, team, welcome back to Servicely. This will be a new interface.
Sam, I'm not sure. Yeah, there we go. That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. So look, this will be a new interface for some of you. This is very much a work in progress. So we're showing you a bit of a sneak peek as to what's coming in one of the next releases of the platform. I also want to encourage you to use the Q&A section of the webinar. If you have any questions that you'd like for us to approach at the end, I'll do my best to be brief so we can talk about some examples and answer some questions. But Sophie Pro is sort of our working title for this interface, right? And again, this is just the chat-based interface to this agentic framework. Of course, we're talking about execution via workflow and third-party triggers as well. But for now, I think this is a nice and familiar interface. So we can ask Sophie questions about anything within the platform, right? Sophie has access to all those agents and assistants that we were talking about before, as well as the tools and the RAG pipeline of data within our platform. So we can ask her questions like, who is Sam Herring's manager? I can type today, right? Sophie will go off, she will look up the information, invoke the right tools, make multiple queries, and return some information. Sam's manager is Dion, right? Who's the CEO? How do I contact him? Right? So if you can use that information to reach out and grab Dion's phone number, his email address, whatever the case might be. And because it's using all of the data that I have access to within the platform, right, all of our role-based security access control is kicking in as well. If I didn't have access to this data from a visibility perspective, Sophie would let me know. Right? So we can use these models, these frameworks, to start to expose information in a far more conversational way that can also then be acted upon, right? So as an example, maybe I'm asking Sophie just sort of a generic question about expense claims, right? So I have an expense claim to submit for the engineering fee. Let's figure out who might the approver be. Who would approve this, right? Sophie can go and look at our group structure, look at the departments, try to figure out the users and figure out that, hey, Dion, yet again, is going to be approving this particular request for me. Right, that's pretty handy, but what about the catalog item itself, right? How do I submit this, right? Again, using that organizational data, we can then pull out the reimbursement request catalog item, or surface knowledge articles with best practice. You might have seen in the past, we've talked about RAG as a way to look at lots of information across the platform and to aggregate and summarize the results. And that was purely in a knowledge context in the past, but now with these new frameworks, we're able to do that across the entire data structure. Right, really powerful, really potent. Let's start a new chat because we want to actually start interrogating things a little bit more seriously. So let's assume that we are that incident manager or that queue manager, let's have a look at our workload, right? So how much work do I have on at the moment, right? Because we're using that natural language understanding in the platform, Sophie's able to find the right agent to query that response, invoke the right tools under the hood to pull out that data and manifest it in this visual format, right? It does all of the renderings. We get it in a nice table. You'll have to excuse my screen width while we're sharing. It's a bit funky, but it's not just about reviewing data. We can also ask her to help us with things. So as an example, we've got quite a few things here that we need to figure out. Let's prioritize this. Let me prioritize. Right? Sophie can use the prompt layers that we build directly into the interface to be able to help us understand, well, what drives priority? Is it SLA status? Is it impact? Is it priority? Is it a custom field of our own division, right? Because the framework is deeply integrated with the platform, it also takes into account your configuration. So if you've got a custom field or if you've got a bespoke workflow, Sophie Pro, our agentic framework is ready to handle it. Right, so Sophie's given us a recommended order of action here. Cool, okay, let's, that sounds good enough to me. Let's leave a comment, right? Let's update that journal note on this incident, letting the agent know, the customer know that we're gonna look into this one pretty quickly. Just for the purposes of time, I'm gonna paste this question in instead of trying to type it by hand. But let's just leave a client journal update, right? Letting the customer know that we're looking into this particular question, right? Sophie will play back the message, hey, we're going to continue investigating this before she makes any changes to a record on our behalf, right? Just additional safeguards to make sure that things are working the way that we want them to. Of course, she could just do this entirely on her own if we were to allow her to. Right, let's tell her to send it. So if we will go in, update that record or try to, and go for gold, right? And this is part of that platform. It's just being able to update that record, send that out, and do that conversational exchange directly in platform. Let's try some other bits and pieces. So the tools within the platform allow us to interface with the information directly in here. Let's ask her to help us create an incident, right? Help me create a new incident. Now, again, just for the purposes of time, I'm going to copy some stuff over from my script here, but Sophie's going to ask us the mandatory fields on an incident form. What are the things that we have to populate? And again, this is especially helpful for our end user, right? They're not going to use the term incident, but we can tell Sophie how to differentiate between a request and an incident. So when that conversation comes in, right, whether that be through the portal or through another conversational means, we can start guiding that end user through this process. This particular incident, right, this is about one of our web servers. Web server 03 has become unresponsive. It looks like WordPress isn't running. What are we going to do? We can send through that information. Sophie can provide a bit of extra insights. Hey, we need to know things about the priority. We need to know things about all of the other information. So let's say impact is high, urgency is high, and raise it on my behalf. Right? Sophie will go off, review that data schema, create all of the information, and then ultimately, when we say make it, it'll create that incident on our behalf, right? Pre-populating all of the information, giving us a summarization of it, sending us a link, giving us the SLA definitions, all of that fun stuff, right? We can also ask it to, do things like raise subtasks for us, right? So we can say, raise a subtask for the database support team to investigate this issue, right? And so if you'll be able to look into that structure, create that subtask, parent it to the incident, and invoke its own workflow, right? And that can include things like, sending notifications out automatically, or providing some example steps on how to start resolving these issues based on historically completed tasks. We can even ask her questions about what sorts of teams may help us with particular problems, all the way down to actually prompting updates from that team directly from a conversational exchange. Right? Really powerful. Let's have a slightly different approach, right? We're talking about an agentic framework within the platform, but one of the really potent capabilities of the Servicely platform is the ability to interface with third-party systems. Right, so what I've done is I've gone in and I've created a tool that allows us to check CIs for any open vulnerabilities against NIST's open API endpoint. Right, so if I ask Sophie to check the WordPress servers for open vulnerabilities, Sophie will tell us what she's going to do. We're going to look up the CIs in the CMDB for anything related to WordPress. We're going to query the NIST vulnerability endpoint, and I'm going to play back all of that information that's potentially related to our CIs, right? And because that's a trusted source of truth out in the wild, we can actually bring in that information and use it for our own interpretation. No need to wait for a SecOps person. This could run on a regular interval, right? On a scheduled job to help us understand, is there things out there that we should be a little bit cognizant of? My WordPress version is running 2.0.1, right? And so it's going to take a look at all of the bits and pieces that are related to that as part of the response from NIST. Super straightforward. We can then ask Sophie to raise a change on our behalf, right? So raise a change to help remediate these issues. So that way we can get all of that information, bake it into the change, use it to drive things like priority and impact. And again, before creating any changes in the system, Sophie will go off and play it all back to us. What are we going to do? What's the deal? All of this work can go straight in, creating that change request, automatically raising it, letting us know that there's no conflicting changes that are during that scheduled time, right? Really powerful. Last thing here is creating agents, and I'm very cognizant I'm about to run out of time. So one of the examples that we can do within the platform is we can use this agentic framework to create content within Servicely, right? So as an example, we may ask it, help me write a script that can review, that can return all incidents with the number 6 in the number, right? This generation of scripted content, all of the existing code within the platform to help infer and guide our structure, right? So it's not just using the ChatGPT generated capability, it's using all of the code that's within your existing instance, as well as our best practices and recommendations to help guide you. Right? And this is really powerful, especially when you're just getting started with the platform and maybe you need a little bit of extra support, understanding things like best practices. This is a really easy way to get started very quickly. And it can generate some really complex and interesting data structures. For example, right, let's ask it to help create a new AI assistant, right? In this particular one, it's going to help us generate new knowledge articles. Sophie doesn't just play developer, right? Or, conversation. Sophie actually allows us to have this meaningful, requirements-driven conversation about what this thing needs to do, right? So she asks us about the requirements, proposes an approach that we can then tweak and define and refine using our own best practices and standards. So I could say, just do it. And off Sophie will go, creating those individual records, creating the system AI assistant record, all of the bespoke tools, right? Using the code from within the API structures that we've already defined to create all of these elements autonomously, right? So a really powerful self-perpetuating engine that allows you to really quickly go from zero to hero in an agentic framework that's bespoke to you and the challenges that you're facing within your business.
Excellent, Sam. Thank you very much. Spot on time. Very conscious of everybody's time, but thank you, Sam. Great demo. Great to see, the technology and what it's capable. Hopefully, that's really opened up some of the thought processes. Keeping in mind that's only a subset of what's actually possible when we're looking at it from an agentic AI framework. The framework is extensible, meaning whilst we will provide a number of agents out the box for the commonly used things like major incident detection, problem detection, some of the things that Sam has shown us today. The intention is that as customers, you can extend that to effectively have agentic AI agents plugged into the Servicely agentic AI framework to pretty much do whatever that may be that you need. Simple example that I can anticipate people would want, right? We have our approval matrix is sitting in SAP or in Oracle. Can we pull that through into Servicely to use that to drive the approval mechanism? Create an agent, agents pulling in that data real time and allowing you to drive those more dynamic workflows and approval processes. So I think there's so many opportunities. Obviously, we were limited to time. Hopefully, that's given you some insight. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to have a bit more of a deep dive and discussion around what's possible. What you've seen today, some of which is available today, some of which will be available in the upcoming release targeted for August, September timeframe. but would like to thank everybody. And Sam, thank you for the demo. Thank you to everybody who joined us today, and hopefully you found the session informative and useful. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, team. Have a wonderful day.